Thank you so much. Well, hello to everyone who is tuning in. Hopefully, everyone's feeling pumped and refreshed from some gameplay with Respawn. Hopefully, you're feeling good and you're ready to hear some nice insights from a few members of the industry here. So, everyone joining, my name is Andrew Gonzalez. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm a member of the recruiting team here at Jam City. I'm so excited to be kicking us off for our first of 6 Jam City Talks this weekend. We have 6 different sessions all weekend long from different members of our Jam City team, everything from game development to talking about gender representation in games to talking about how to land your role in gaming. And I'm stoked to be kicking off with a few talented engineers from several of our teams here at Jam City. I will really be using this as a learning opportunity as much as everyone watching, because if you can't tell, I don't know a single thing about coding. So I am really excited to ask some questions that some might be obvious, some might be questions that are a little bit more advanced, but hopefully everyone watching will take something away from this specific session around the different opportunities that you can have within engineering, specifically within games. So I'm excited to have 3 talented engineers here from the team. I'll have them each introduce themselves, give you a little bit more background about their role. So for whoever wants to start, do you mind giving us your name, your pronouns, your role here at Jam City, and if you wouldn't mind also just a little background as to how did you get to this place where you're at now? Whoever wants to go first.
I guess I'll start. So I'm Alex Emmet, he, him, engineering manager on Genies and Gems here at Jam City. I kind of grew into my current role. I'd always been curious about, the teams and the business of the companies that I'm in. And because Jam City integrates so many different great like teams and talent, it's been really great to kind of grow here. And so when the former studio tech director left, that sort of mindfulness and just familiarity like opened this opportunity to kind of step in and help provide that support for the team and for the studio that I'm a part of. So, and then I think getting into gaming, just a fun little quip. I needed to get my own PC as a kid, so there was PC Recycle. So we went around the streets looking for some, computers that people had left out, and I hacksawed the hard drive out because it had Windows ME in order to install a new hard drive and get Windows 2000 on my first personal computer. So that's old school.
Thanks, Alex.
I can go next. My name is Nicole Zhang. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the UI engineer on an unannounced game here at Jam City. And I'm relatively new in my early in my career. And I started off working at smaller companies within Unity, and I did lots of different kinds of work. I did gameplay, networking, account management, all different kinds of stuff like that. I eventually found a niche that I really excelled in, that I really liked working on. Namely being UI. And that's how I eventually found myself here in Jam City. I've always wanted to work in games. I've pretty much been playing games my whole life. Apparently, according to my parents, when I was 3 years old, I hooked up my parents' VCR, and I just knew that tech and art was always the right field for me.
Sure, and I'm next. My name is Jeram Clervius, the pronouns he, him, his, and I'm a senior engineer here at Jam City. I actually work for the Central Tech. We call it GS services here, which is pretty much a part of the company that builds technology for all the game teams throughout the whole company. And I've been at the company for about a little bit over a year now. And I found myself here pretty much. I was moving to Los Angeles and I was looking for a job. I was actually I've never been interested in working specifically for a gaming company or for, anything around games, but it's been very interesting so far and I actually really like it. So here I am.
Thanks, Jeram. Well, I love the differences in your backgrounds in terms of how you got to where you're at in gaming as well too. And I feel like there's a few of us at Jam City who have come from former lawyers and they're now game directors, or former artists, and now they're completely in different like backgrounds and positions here at Jam City. And I think that's so cool. And I remember one of the first questions that I had coming into gaming around specifically engineering was, how is engineering different in games and what it is in, like, let's say a tech space or like a social media app or a social media network? I often, think about engineering to be just kind of this one big thing. And then I quickly realized coming into gaming that it's a completely different thing here in games. Engineering, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more, I think, creative in a way. So I'd love to hear from all three of y'all your perspective on how do you feel engineering in game development is different from maybe more traditional engineering outside of the industry. I'll start with Nicole, if that's okay.
Yeah. So like you said, the games industry is a very creative corner of engineering. That was really the main reason why I wanted to go into it. And because I've always really liked art, I've been doing art my whole life, and I also grew up really loving tech. And so the games industry was, it's just a place that it made sense for me. There's just freedom of like creative input and expression, not just even with the UI that I'm doing, but just, with gameplay. So many different aspects of game dev involves some creative input and expression, trying to make sure everything works, but also make sure it feels good. And there's a lot of room for that kind of creative freedom. Also, with working in game dev, you work with a lot of different teams, a lot of different disciplines. So you got the design teams and the art teams and engineering teams, all their work coming together. I think it's just very cool seeing that. So I have people in just disciplines that I, probably never be able to excel in, but I get to work with them very closely. And then just seeing how these different components work together, I think it's really cool. And just creating something that's fun and brings joy to people's lives is really, I think, the dreams as far as I can go with my career.
That's awesome. Thanks, Nicole. And Jeram, you actually mentioned you called that how you are on the central team at Jam City here, Central Engineering. So I'm curious, from your perspective, like, how does central differ here than maybe what the central team might look like elsewhere, if there is a difference?
I think there are some differences. We always keep in mind, though, from our central team here, that we're working for, or we're delivering products to the game teams, right, individually, and that the game teams, so their goals are our goals. Their goals are to really provide a fun product for, the users who end up using it. And so our goals are to help those teams provide a fun product. And I think that's the difference behind what we do at a company like Jam City, or for the gaming industry, versus working in a traditional tech company. Is you're not really engineering by itself, period, always has certain challenges that comes up, right? But you don't always approach your challenges from the viewpoint of, I want to figure out how to make something that is fun for someone else, right? You usually approach your challenges from the viewpoint of, I need to build this thing, solve this problem, and then that's it. But then the underlying task and everything that we are doing pretty much is just fun. I think that's fun too.
Awesome. And then Alex, from even like a managerial standpoint, overseeing like a dev team here at Jam City, like from your perspective, what's kind of the differences?
Well, from a managerial perspective, I don't think there's that much. I think from I've mostly worked in gaming, but my question would be like, what is traditional engineering? When we look at machine learning, when we look at the software that runs on satellites, where you're worrying about like, how are you going to protect yourself from errors, from like, solar radiation, to, financial, like, high, like concurrency systems that run like so much of like our infrastructure. And, engineering is in games is different because you kind of need to know some of that physics and math that you had if you're on the client side and you want to potentially break physics and math. You need to kind of know what you're breaking and why you're breaking it sometimes. So that's, I think, where that creativity with traditional engineering kind of can fuse together. And then because we are sort of seasoned to taste in our experiences, it's harder to do sort of, that fixed, here's my test-driven development, or here's my fixed process to get from A to B. And it's much more about, well, how can I get this quickly to our players and then, do the next thing that's going to come up, like whether that's the next platform you're going to port the game to, or it's the next, like, like sort of pushing the envelope with like rendering that, shaders or whatever it is that you're going to be trying to pull in for those newer devices that you can now build on top of.
Awesome. So, I mean, I hear a little bit of similarities. I hear a little bit of differences. I love what y'all mentioned around like the fun aspect too. I feel like that's a part of every department that I've gone to at Jam City, like feels that way. Even like recruiting in a games company is so much funner than recruiting at like a traditional tech company. I feel that vibe. I think Jam City, we're also in a pretty unique place too, where not only are we different from, of course, like tech, but also more so we're specifically focused on mobile. So I'm curious to hear about, from the three of y'all, your inputs around what are some differences, if there are any differences, in being on a game development, like engineering team on the mobile side of things versus maybe console or PC. And I'll leave this open to whoever maybe wants to take a stab at it first.
I think so. I'll answer it from my viewpoint. I've traditionally, I'm not someone who has always been into games. I actually don't play many games here, even today. But I think what the difference is that it makes it easier for some of us who are working on some of these platforms to actually test out what we're working on, because we don't have to plug in a whole console or jump onto a PC. Everyone has access to their phone. It's always on them, and so I can always pull out my phone, download, a game or an app, and then test out something that we've done. And I think that from the engineering perspective, you always want to be able to test out your work in a very easy way, and I think that is probably the biggest difference, and it's a good difference because it just makes part of your job easier,
Yeah, it's all about that accessibility that we talk about
Yeah.
so much in mobile.
Yeah, that's what I was actually gonna jump off of it. I think with mobile games, it's a lot more accessible than some like the newest AAA game that requires you to get a 3080 that you can't find anywhere. Like with mobile games, like a lot more people have a smartphone where they can just go to the app store, try out one of our games. I think the accessibility aspect of it is I think really important for people who may not be able to get a brand new PC who can run like the newest PC and console games. But as far as the engineering side of it, at least for the UI part, I think it's a really fun challenge because obviously with there's different monitor sizes for PC and console games, but I think with mobile games specifically, there's just so many different aspect ratios and resolutions that you have to take into account for. There's phones with the notch, there's phones without notches, there's just a lot of things you have to take into consideration when you're developing for mobile, and also with in general the hardware is not as powerful as PC, so you have to be a lot more aware of memory and storage, and it's a new challenge, but honestly I think it's really fun, and it's cool making something that is can be very, very widely accessible.
Yeah, I think having come from like console development on the publishing side into sort of the client engineering on mobile games was really interesting. On console, you've got generally larger teams because you need to push the envelope and push that hardware and get every ounce of performance that you can out of that to make things stand out. And that can lead to very focused engineering problems and expertise, which is great if you love that narrow focus. But in mobile, you get to wear a lot of hats. We usually have much smaller teams, and you need to switch from, investigating those different devices to how you're going to interact with other like networks to just making sure that all the network scenarios and everything are supported as people's, people are playing on lower end networks or just, degrading away from a certain cell tower and switching context. And I have to say, at least the mobile platform developers do a much better job of abstracting most of the driver support, because if you've ever had to deal with PC driver compatibility issues, well, Yeah, it's a fun exercise into documentation and coding gotchas there. So I think if you want to get that broader sense, mobile is a great place to be. And I'm really curious to see, as companies move their engines towards mobile for some of these, you know, more traditional console experiences, how that works as mobile hardware continues to push the envelope.
100%. I feel like the focus is on mobile right now with a lot of different publishers, right? I mean, you just hear, I feel like every single other week, a major publisher either jumping into mobile or acquiring other mobile studios or whatnot. So the focus is there. And now I'm curious to also learn more about kind of taking a few steps backwards instead of kind of looking outward and now looking now really inward, and specifically on the teams that we have here at GM City. I often talk to a lot of, whether it's game design students or students that are CS students, that will have questions around like, how does a developer in gaming, and this could be in mobile or non-mobile, how do they actually work with like game designers? Are they a quote unquote game designer? Are they a developer? And how do they overlap if they do overlap? So I'm also curious to learn from the three of y'all, how do you work with other teams as an engineer in a gaming company? Are you working with artists? Are you working with designers? What does your day look like? And maybe can you draw some on examples as to how you work with other teams? And for this one, I'll start with Jeram.
Yeah, absolutely. So with Central Tech, that's the bulk of my job, is just
Yeah.
working with all the other teams that we have, right? And so I think, to think of like just an example, if we're talking about what one team is necessarily doing, if they're trying to figure out how to bring up a pop-up in a game, or how to facilitate that, that's part of our job too, to help make sure that the tooling that they have in order to make that works for them. And so we'd end up working with the artists to find out what would be the dimensions, or what are the expected sizes, what exactly would the artwork look like in a game, and how could we build something that works with what they're working with, so that they can deliver a product that's, I guess, efficient and that works well for the players.
Yeah, so I, being a UI engineer, I work very, very closely with designers and artists. And frequently in meetings, I ask designers what they need for the future, and then I can always ask them questions on anything. And then with the artists, I can want to make sure that what they create in the correct format and how it fits into the whole the whole feature. And so I work very closely with both of them. And I think that working with many different teams and different disciplines is another very rewarding part of game dev, as I mentioned earlier. Because with the game designers, they explained to me like what this feature they want implemented is, which was great for me, because when I was younger, I always wanted to like make a game on my own, but it turns out like I have no good game design ideas. So so I decided to go into in the engineering side, so I get it to implement these really cool ideas that people have and bring those ideas to life. And then I can work with the art team to make sure everything looks good, everything is like formatted correctly, and it can work for at least in mobile. Like there's many different aspect ratios you got to be aware of, like for like tablets versus phones. Yeah, I have to be very much in close contact with all these different teams to make sure that everything is working as intended.
For sure.
Yeah, I think I wish I could say yes to most of their asks and most of their and be that sort of expert who can help them understand like how they can do their system or their implementation, their art, get their art visible and in front of them so they can see it in game and have that full context as quickly as possible. One of the difficulties is because we're constantly changing how we kind of deliver those assets and those systems to the player, trying to balance that the asks of the present versus what you'll have to maintain for the future is a really tough challenge as a manager, because when a designer like builds a one-off tool to do what they wanted to do because they've been learning to code on the side, or when they ask you to kind of do this one-off tool without really thinking through how the system is going to evolve, and if you don't slow them down and say, hey, what are you going to build next off of this? you can easily run into like just trying to keep like a huge toolkit of tools like up and running for designers and artists, and you're spending so much time getting that done that the new stuff that they want to work on is hard to prioritize. And so there's that balancing act of like, will you actually use this, and how is this going to grow so that we continue to see sort of the benefits of supporting this, and how long will it take you to do your work to get this like in front of the player if we don't provide this. And that's the really tough part of the conversation, being like, no, I don't think this is going to make it, but we can do X or Y or Z, and maybe that'll still work, to kind of cop out.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty unique perspective too, in terms of being able, like you said, Alex, with wishing that you could meet every demand or request coming from other teams. Like, I'm sure that's puts you in a little bit of a tricky situation, but I'm sure you can bring that technical, I think, perspective to things as well too. Kind of flipping gears here for a second, also in talking about maybe like how or what maybe students, for example, let's say, should be thinking about when they're considering maybe positions in engineering, or they're considering maybe more technical roles. Is there any sort of maybe guidance that the three of y'all could be able to give around maybe a student that's a CS student, or a student that's considering CS, and maybe they're considering breaking into games? That's where they want to be at. They're considering gaming. What are some maybe pieces of wisdom that you could give these students, or thoughts that you have around how they could best prepare for potentially like a role within games? And for this one, I'll start with Alex.
Oh boy. There's a lot of different like ins to these products. They're team efforts because there's a lot of moving pieces to build and deliver on. So, if your passion is like networking or rendering, or it's related to UI, like find what it is that you're going to add to the team and kind of get you in. And then is there something that you want to grow towards, or is it just kind of keeping up with the technology that's there, and making sure that that's an area that you can explore and focus it like in on. I think making sure you've got the math fundamentals and the data structure, like don't make tightly coupled systems. It's really not fun to have new folks come in and then it's, it only does the one thing that, the designer asked for. Well, that's great. But the next time we go and revisit that, or like the designer wants to, suddenly make like, that like bazooka launch a rhinoceros instead, like you're not going to be able to do that like if you haven't like kind of built it in a way that is sort of extensible code, and finding that speed versus flexibility is it's kind of the art of engineering. So I don't know if that it's very useful to come in with that project and group experience, because when you've had someone else use your tool or like had to interact with your code, you get that feedback. Hey, this was hard to use. I don't know why you did this, and I used this in the wrong way. And if you've only done your own development, you get to be the designer, the engineer, the artist, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that is something that other people could build off of. So just, when you want to explore, you can do it, but having that feedback, just either other indie devs to take a look at it, or working with other students, getting that experience and picking kind of that specialty and focus. So you've got that, like, I'm strong in this, and this is how where I'm going to broaden from, is solid.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Alex. I think one of the reasons why I actually ended up here at Jam City was because of my focus in UI. think finding a niche that you really excel in, that you really like doing, can definitely put you, in a step up other applicants. That isn't to say if you just want to do like general like gameplay stuff, like that isn't to say like that's not feasible, but I think having a niche will definitely give you a leg up. And like I said, I started off in smaller companies, so I was able to explore all these different facets of game dev or game dev engineering, and I was able to find what I liked doing there. And I think also Alex was saying was working on projects. I think if you're a student and you can take game dev classes where you can work on a project either individually or in a group, I think it's a really great place to start. My portfolio when I first graduated college was mostly just school projects, which was, I think, better than having no portfolio. I think having portfolio where you can demonstrate your work, whatever it is, even if it's just school projects, which mine was just school projects. I didn't have too many personal projects, but I think if I had personal projects, it would have helped out a little bit earlier in my career. Because I won't sugarcoat it. I'm relatively early to my game dev career. Just started a couple of years ago, so I kind of know what the market is like now. I went into college, a state college in the Midwest, so I didn't really have any connections out here, in LA for the game dev industry. So I just really had to be very persistent with my search. I just didn't give up. I just applied everywhere I could. And I definitely faced a lot of rejections before I was able to, get my first few jobs. And I would just say, like, don't take rejections as failures. They're opportunities to learn what you need to know forward on how you can improve on your future interviews. Like, I have had interviews where I got rejected, but then I reached out to the hiring manager, the recruiter, and asked them like, oh, well, what can I do to improve my chances next time? What can I improve on? Is there something that I need to learn that can maybe improve my chances? And almost pretty much every single time I've done that, the hiring managers are very happy to help out, because I love seeing more like brilliant minds enter the games industry. So always like ask for help if you manage to get an interview. You can always figure out what you need to know, because you don't know what you don't know until you get told like, oh, you need to know this, right? So learning these things from the interviews, even if you don't get the job, it's just another step forward. I would say just persistence, just keep your mind on the goal. In the meantime, while you're waiting on interviews or callbacks, continue to work on projects. And these projects don't have to be big, right? They can just be like a very small, simple thing. Like, keep the scope small if you just want to keep building a portfolio with some like one interesting feature you can just put in a small game. And I think just adding things to your portfolio can definitely help make you stand out in the job search.
Yeah, so I think, we tend to give advice from our own life experiences, right? And so I don't have that much experience, or at least I just don't have the history of having wanted to be specifically working in the game industry. So for me, it's not necessarily advice that I can give to people who wanted to be in the game industry, but advice about how, I guess, best to prepare yourself when you get into the gaming industry. And I think I'd want to piggyback on what Alex said. From what I've seen, there's a lot of, especially in our last sprint, there's always a lot of moving parts, moving pieces from so many different teams to try to get a product out, to deliver something out. And if you can get yourself to become the kind of person who can work collaboratively very well, whatever the technology is that you like to work on, but if you can get yourself to become that kind of person, I think that will help you stand out a whole lot when you finally do get in the gaming industry. If you can, number one, find your niche, find what you like to work on, and be able to work with other people as they work on their part, so that you guys can all, as a team, deliver a final product together. I think that would really be helpful.
Nice. Oh, really good advice. Oh, go ahead.
I actually thought of two. If you really love building everything yourself, prototype engineering is a thing. When folks want to prove out like kind of a system or like a feature, being able to throw something together really quick and not have to worry about maintaining it is sometimes an option. And then two, the industry is remarkably small sometimes. Try to, like Nicole said, reach out to the folks. These are people, and they stay in touch and they'll move somewhere else, and that's going to open further opportunities for you if you've kind of kept that communication open. So
yeah, like you can, if you had a really great interview with with someone, but you didn't get the job, you can always reach out and either follow them with email or like add them on LinkedIn. There's a lot of ways that you can stay connected with people that you have talked to in the industry. And yeah, also the first thing Alex said, like game jams, if you can find a game jam happening, that's one way to also meet other developers, and also a way to build your portfolio to work on some like really quick project. It's also pretty fun as well.
Sweet. And kind of piggybacking off of this question now, I'm curious to also hear the three of y'all's input around maybe somebody who's a few years into their engineering career. Maybe they've already spent 4 or 5 years in engineering, and maybe they want to take a jump now into game development. Any advice there? Where do they even begin?
That was me. Yeah. So yeah, I never knew anything. Well, personally, I just was never interested into jumping into gaming. But what I think a lot of people mistake before jumping into gaming, it's probably the same mistakes that I made in my mind, was to think that my specific set of skills probably does not fit into the gaming industry, right? Like if you're an engineer, there is likely a chance that what you know how to do can benefit a gaming company some kind of way, right? And so what I did was just look for companies that were hiring engineers here in Los Angeles. And I didn't specifically look for a gaming company, but what I found when I did find a gaming company is that they were looking for engineers who knew how to do what I knew how to do. And so that's, I think, the thing that maybe some people don't keep in mind, that even if I don't necessarily know how to build a game specifically, or even if I don't know how to do everything that the gaming companies want engineers to know how to do, what I know how to do might still be useful at a gaming company.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's obviously a lot of overlap when and we're all under the umbrella of engineering. I think looking at different job postings and seeing what kinds of things they're looking for, and seeing if those apply to your skills. Like say if you're working on like C++, and that's still a language that's very, very much used in the games industry. Yeah, just reading the job posts can give you a good idea of what they're looking for, what kind of skills. You'll see posts that are asking for 3D math skills. I think finding what the overlap is in your specific knowledge and what the kind of companies and jobs you want to look for in those job postings can definitely at least point you in the right direction on what you might want to pivot your studies on. Because then you can also just look at always watch videos on what can really set you apart in the games industry versus your traditional engineering experience. And also, like I said before, like building up a portfolio, like taking your existing engineering knowledge, and if you can put that into just some interesting or some personal project, that's a way to showcase your ability to pivot your existing knowledge into a whole nother field. I think also just like networking with people in the industry is also can also be very, very helpful as well.
Agreed.
I think every company appreciates it, like when a candidate comes in having done some of the research and being able to be like, hey, here's how I can help you. Not only does that show interest in what they're doing, but makes it really easy to be like, oh yeah, this is what else will I need to kind of inform this person about. I think depending on the studio, it can be very challenging to step into to a game development role if that's a big part of the company's culture requirement. And so figuring out if that's what that company does, or if the company's more about that broader mindset. Sometimes it can just be the focus of the games. Like I remember folks that had gotten into games because they were race car drivers and they really wanted to get into like Forza and stuff like that. And, the way I kind of went into mobile development was from kind of C# development as services to working kind of in middleware to actually working on Unity client code. And so, just if there's the fit and the that sort of just look at that and make the decision. Is this the opportunity I want to go for, and learn about that company?
Absolutely. And I mean, you kind of touched on this a little bit too, Nicole. I think all three of y'all a little bit in terms of like how you prepare and how you network. But I'm most curious to also hear your input around passion projects and these side projects, because we often hear a lot about this as students are breaking into the industry, or if they're coming from a different industry as well too. So I'm curious to hear, what's your input on passion projects? One, do you find value in them? And then two, where does one even begin? Because I talk to students all the time who maybe have their CS degrees, that just graduated, but they really want this, job at a major publisher, but they don't have any idea how to connect maybe this experience they've learned over here to this side of things. So I'm curious to hear your inputs on these passion projects.
I love them. They're useful tools for learning and for improving your own skills. And especially if you've got even like an inkling of an idea in your head, and you might want to see it, come to life. You have, especially if you know the skills that it takes, to bring them to life. You can easily just put yourself in a position where you build out that project and you incorporate in your building of that project some tool that you had to learn, in order to build that project. So then you come out with a new project that's your passion project, and you really appreciate it because all of it came from your mind. But in addition to that, you also had to learn something else to build it. And that knowledge sticks with you, not just in your passion project building, but you can bring that knowledge with you to work too. Now you have an extra thing in your tool set that you can bring to work, and you can contribute in that extra way,
It's interesting with passion projects because sometimes it can be hard to go through like a whole set of candidates and look through and really evaluate, give enough time to looking at that. But like Joram said, when you have put in the work, that comes out in the interview, that comes out in how you also bring yourself like to work on things. I think someone was asking about inspiration for engineers. If you have that mindset where you want to kind of tackle projects, and that kind of pushes you to explore how you could do something better, or what you could learn next, I think that doesn't just show itself in terms of like your portfolio, but it also shows in how you show up at work and how you step up when something unknown comes across your plate.
Yeah, I think Alex makes a really great point that not only does it, look really great in a portfolio, but also it, through making these projects, you learn a lot of things. You teach yourself a lot of stuff just by doing. Like that's really, really what it comes down to. You just have to do it. It's like if you have an idea, just work on it. I mean, also keep in mind the scope. Like might be disappointed if you're going to try to work on like the next Half-Life 3 or something. Like keep the scope a little bit realistic, but if you have an idea, just work on it. That's really like all you just need to start working on it. And if you finish it, whenever you do finish it, it's great to add to your portfolio. But also the really important thing to take away from is what you learn from making these projects.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of value from being able to learn things that maybe you don't learn in your day-to-day kind of role, and being able to work on these. And then like I mentioned, being able to then show that through like interviews or through different assignments or in the workplace. So no, I absolutely agree with the three of y'all. I love when students also talk about passion projects, or anyone for that matter, when it's on their resume and they bring it up and they get really, really giddy and really excited about something that they've been able to develop or work on totally by themselves. And it absolutely those when you're speaking with them. So I have a few questions that are coming in from a few folks that are watching, but I would love to do a quick exercise before I jump into these questions actually. And I would love to hear about a day in the life of your specific roles. I think I'm often asked like, okay, I'm going to be an engineer. I'm going to be an intern on the engineering team at Jam City. What do I do? Do I just like sit behind a kind of a keyboard and just go at it, and then, or do I do meetings? What does a day in the life look like? So I know I'm putting the three of y'all on the spot a little bit with this one, but do you mind each maybe spending a few seconds walking me through like what does an average day in the life look like of an engineer on your specific teams at Jam City? And I'll start with Nicole on this one.
Now that we're working from home, obviously still. So my day usually goes, I wake up, turn on my computer, check and see if I have any meetings for the day. We sometimes have stand-up meetings where the team just coordinates and checks into each other and just see that make sure that production is going well. If anyone has any questions or need anything from people, it's a great way to communicate with your team. A lot of game development teams work in 2-week sprints. So the sprints is when you get assigned your tasks for these 2 weeks. And I think a really great thing about Jam City, especially, is that it's I think they really trust their developers. There's no like sense of like micromanagement or anything. Like I get my tasks, and I've definitely proved that I can get those done. So most days I'll just keep working on my tasks. I have usually like a feature or two to work on per sprint, and I just work at it. And then if I have any questions for the design or art team, I just reach out to them. And yeah, I'm able to get my work done in very positive culture.
Sweet. Thank you, Nicole.
Mm-hmm. Pretty similar. I think yeah, we're all working from home now pretty much. So like you wake up in the morning, and if you have whatever it is you're doing during the day, I think what I would advise, especially if you're working from home, is to have, I've seen this advice given out in so many different places too, but it's also worked for me, is that you have your work environment in a place that's separate from just your living environment. You just want to make sure you know that when I go into this area of where I live, I'm working. And so I come on my desk in the morning, and then the very first thing that we do, and this is something that coming from the traditional engineering environment was a surprise to also see that it's also the same thing in the gaming environment. It's almost the same. Every morning you have the stand-up meetings where you talk about what you're working on, what you've been working on, if you're stuck on anything. And same as what Nicole just said, we have 2-week sprints. At the beginning of the sprint, you pick up a number of tickets for the features you're going to be working on, and you just work on them throughout the sprint. Depending on what days and what meetings are scheduled, sometimes you'll have meetings that you have to attend, and then at the end of the sprint, you demo what you've done and you deliver on your work, and that's really it.
As an engineering manager, that changes a bit. Yeah, I think I have a lot of meetings during the day, both with our internal and external teams. There's a number of just, making sure pull requests are happening, checking in with, my team to see if we're taking the right approach on tackling the tasks, if there's any questions that have come up, or if we're not going to get certain things done and ready for QA or for the designer, for our UX / artists to use by that end of sprint. I kind of feel like leads and managers sort of owe it to their teams to tank meetings. I remember as a engineer, there were certain jobs I had where I was in like over 20 hours of meetings a week, and it's very hard to actually get work done when you're constantly getting interrupted. So trying to make that time for my team. And then I'll do a little subtle plug. I review candidates because we're hiring for C++ engineers on my team. And then just making sure that I'm spending some time looking at our roadmap and what our kind of upcoming goals are going to be, so that we're reprioritizing for the next sprint and sort of the next quarter. And we've got the team members that are either on hand or being hired to meet those goals.
Awesome. Well, thanks to the three of y'all for that. I have just 2 more questions. This next one, I'll open it up to the floor to whoever wants to take it before I end on a somewhat fun one. But my question for y'all is, how has your roles changed in this remote environment? I know that it's changed a little bit for like game designers, creatives, like in terms of like artists and designers, but specifically engineering, have you seen a massive change in your day-to-days? Has it maintained the same, or how has it changed since being remote? And I'll open it up to whoever wants to take that one.
More meetings.
More meetings.
Yes, way more meetings on my end. I feel like when I was working in the office, I was able to just, sit on the computer and get a lot of work done. Sometimes I'd get somebody who'd come over and have some questions, or if I had questions for others. But besides that, we just have certain meetings that were on the calendar, and we, go into a conference room and have those meetings. But since we've gone remote, yeah, there is a whole lot more meetings. That's I think the biggest difference that I've noticed as far as like what the work day looks like as far as like the change.
Nicole, Alex?
Yeah, or for me, like I joined Jam City within this past year, so I have not been able to work in the office yet. But from my previous company, or I guess we'll start with Jam City. Like I was able to get all of my like my computer and everything that I needed to get my home office set up very, very like efficiently. So from what I remember working in office versus now, like I was able to pretty much set up everything in the same way that I do at work. So I can still get my work done pretty much in the same fashion. Like I need to have like more than one monitor, like, and Jam City was really great at getting that all set up for me. And yeah, so working from home hasn't been too different, but yeah, I guess I would say like there have been more meetings because sometimes if you have just one question, you could just like walk over to someone and be like, hey, can you help me out with this, or like can you explain this one thing to me? But then it's like, oh, let me just set up this Google Meet meeting, so but I mean, it's like for me, for those kind of things, they are technically meetings, but it's also just like, you could just walk over to someone's desk and just ask them something. But from working from home, it's still been, it's been a pretty pleasant experience.
Sweet.
There've definitely been some challenges. I mean, from a just purely coding, like I've always had the philosophy that you're not actually done for the day until you push your code to a server, so that if your laptop doesn't boot the next day, or your desktop doesn't boot, you're not just SOL on what you were working on. Don't just have stuff running on one box under your desk. It's a bad life choice. So the big challenges though have been just not being able to share QA devices as easily. Like we can do simulator builds, but that doesn't always work for mobile. And so if you need to test things on specific Amazon Kindle devices, or like a specific Samsung Galaxy, that has the wrong aspect ratio that causes this one weird thing that developers hate, like that is a pain, because then not only does the developer want to get that phone, but then once it's fixed, you want to hand that off to the tester, right? And that might not happen for a week. So that's just made it a little bit more challenging. I think the other big thing was we had sort of our board game lunches and like just coffee breaks where you could catch up with other team members like throughout the studio and have that awareness of what was going on. Or walk over to like a designer's desk and sort of see what their frustration is with their tools not working quite right after like we update something with the game or the UI for the engine. And so that can be a little harder to surface without those meetings popping up, or just kind of be lingering. And that's the worst feeling, when a problem's been lingering because it just hasn't been surfaced. And you're like, I could have saved you like 2 days of work if only you told me this was happening on Monday when so it'll be interesting to see how returning to the office might work. And that said, we've been able to work around a lot of those problems. So virtualization is great.
I agree with all three things that y'all said, whether it's more meetings or not being able to have those like nice coffee chats or those nice impromptu talks. I feel like, just like Nicole mentioned, here I am every few minutes throwing a Google Meet link, sending a Google Meet link to someone and thinking, can you jump on? So I 100% feel that. Well, I have one final question for the three of y'all. I didn't prepare you for this question because I wanted to get your authentic response on it, which is a fun question. And that is, if you could have developed any game out there right now, what would it be and why? If you were the sole developer on a game, it can be a mobile, it can be a console, but if you were the one that had developed it, what would that game be and why? Anyone who wants to take it.
Develop the whole thing.
Yeah, if you were like the lead tech director, lead developer on it, that was you who did that. What game would that be?
I'd say I'm really inspired by Concerned Ape and all this work he's done with Stardew Valley. I like just having a project that like is clearly like his like child, basically something that he loves building on like year after year. Like I were someone to build something like that, like it like that brings a lot of like peace and a lot of joy to people's lives. Like for me, like when I first started playing Stardew Valley, that was like my go-to like de-salting games where I'm like an Apex game or like an Overwatch game was just like, oh, I'm just like, I would just go to like Stardew Valley and just like have this like calm farming experience. And I think that he added multiplayer, which also lets people from different parts of the country just like have a little like fun like town to walk around in. And I think that game is just like, it's one of my favorites. I think just having that sort of passion project, people like keep coming back year after, I know keep going back year after year to keep playing Stardew Valley and seeing what he adds. I think that would have been super cool if I could have made that.
I don't go ahead, Alex. I don't think I have an answer to that question.
That's fair. No worries. Alex, you got one?
I mean, there are a number. I think it depends on like also like what platform. Like if I could do like a VR experience, I kind of want to do almost like a Age of Empires like command experience like in VR, where you're just like grabbing your units and kind of using the gestures to kind of throw them across the map, similar to that old black and white game where you kind of had your hand just as the mouse, like moving around the map. I don't know if that would actually work, but I'm a huge strategy game fan, and I've just been really curious about something that actually captures that sort of limited situational awareness, where you don't have sort of that God's eye view of what's going on, and instead have to rely on where you're at the battlefield to try and like make your decisions. I think that would be really interesting to make. But on mobile, I think I think I'd love to do a Warhammer 40K tie-in where you're invading all of the different planets throughout the galaxy with your little troop of Space Marines or Tau or whatever your favorite faction is. And just having that like go back to base and then jump into like a quick match, I think would be super fun. So Games Workshop, if you're out there, hit me up.
Awesome. Hey, all right. Well, I think we'll bring us to the end here of our session. I want to say a huge thank you to Jeram, to Nicole, and to Alex for being a part of our first of 6 sessions here on the team. Your insights were super valuable. I feel like I learned a thing or two about what y'all do in your days that I could share with more people now when I talk to them. So a huge thank you for taking some time to walk us through and giving us some valuable insight. Next up on our schedule here, I will be chatting with our co-GM and VP of our Burbank studio, Nasia Chambers, talk a little bit more about how to break into the industry. But again, a huge thank you, Jeram, Nicole, Alex. I so appreciate your insights. With that said, we'll wrap up here.
Thank you so much.